Hello, and a very warm welcome to this latest edition of the DW Global Media Forum 2020. I'm your host, Sertan Sanderson, and I'm excited to welcome you to our 10th online session this year. Today, we're here to discuss revenue models for news and media organizations in the digital age. Newspapers are folding, ad sales are tanking, and linear TV and radio are declining. And while there is a huge hunger out there for independent news and unbiased information, there appears to be a matching level of reluctance among many people around the world to put their money where their mouths are and simply pay for digital content. The world is indeed changing, the digital future is here, and media organizations will have to learn to sink or swim in this new dynamic environment. Everyone involved, from top CEOs to middle management marketing experts to junior journalists, must do some serious soul-searching to respond to some of the important questions in this new era. How do media organizations and those that work for them continue to keep the cash flow going in this highly competitive digital age? How do we create business models that are sustainable? How can we try to stay one step ahead of the competition? And where do we have to accept handing over the reins to others in order to stay afloat? And where do we draw the line? Well, let's have a look.
Revenue models for media organizations in a world of digital competition. Welcome to the 10th online session of the Global Media Forum. Digitization processes pose new challenges to media companies, and they offer new opportunities to distribute their content. In addition to the company's own websites, intermediaries such as YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and others are playing an increasingly important role. From community building to paywalls, a wide range of possibilities are opening up in a bid to increase reach and market share. But these developments are also forcing media companies to become more flexible, to constantly adapt to new trends. Many say they have to hand over control of their products and distribution channels to corporations that want to have their share as well. How can media organizations optimize their revenue models in the digital age? Join our discussion.
Yes, how can we optimize our business models and learn to stay in business? Well, this is what we're discussing today, and if you are watching us on Facebook, please do send us your questions. Let us know your thoughts, and our panelists, as well as our community management team, will be happy to answer any questions you might have. And without further ado, let me introduce you to our panel today. In Washington, D.C., I'm being joined by Nicholas Johnston, the editor-in-chief of Axios. Johnston focuses on what he calls smart brevity, conveying information quickly and clearly throughout all content in order to put the audience first and maximize Axios' following. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Johnston.
Hello, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And from New York, I'm being joined by Mr. Samir Patil, the founder of Scroll, a leading digital news company in India. Scroll has entered a series of partnerships throughout the 6th year of its history, including one with Deutsche Welle, and places a firm emphasis on keeping its editorial side and distribution division separate to keep and grow its following. Welcome to the panel, Mr. Patil.
Hello.
Hi there. Now, let me address an opening question to both of you, starting with Mr. Johnston. What single aspect of journalism would you say has changed the most dramatically in the digital realm compared to the analog world? And how does this affect your business decisions?
I think a huge part of it is the ubiquity of information, where the invention of the smartphone means that I have instantaneous access to everything ever created. We talk about this a lot at Axios about what is our real competitor. And sort of on one level, our competitors are other media organizations, Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post. But in another sort of more broader sense, our competitors are Amazon, our Tinder, our Netflix, our anything that you can get on your phone. So it becomes that much more important to understand that you're competing against just this infinite number of apps on someone's phone, where someone can move their thumb a quarter of an inch and access any movie ever created, read any book ever written, chat with their friends, book a vacation, order food online. And so you have to be extremely sort of cognizant of the reader's time. And I think that's what led to a lot of sort of how we think about content creation at Axios. We're not just digital first, we're mobile first. And we realize that we're competing against all these other information sources, all these other things that can take up people's time, which is why we created this writing style called Smart Brevity, which is very much sort of geared towards how people consume information on their smartphones, realizing that is the window to the world. It's not a television screen. It's not a printed page, whether a magazine or a newspaper. It's what you can fit on your smartphone, and you have to really meet the reader there. And that's for us means writing sort of, but much more succinctly, much more conversationally, writing in a way where readers can scan it and skim it. We know they're scrolling through using their phone, jumping around a lot, and thinking a lot about sort of format in presentations. I think really understanding that the smartphone screen is the window for people's look at the entire universe, everything around them and all their information, I think is the most important change. And I think that's the most important thing for journalists to realize, is they have to go meet readers on that platform instead of a lot of the traditional ways we've done journalism in the past.
That's fascinating, because I personally didn't realize that I was competing against Tinder. Mr. Patil, what would you say about that? What are some of the changes that are most important to you and your business model?
Yeah, so I would sort of agree. First of all, I think the emergence of this mobile-first world is the thing that dramatically changed everything. And it's even more, it probably first came to China and India, then the US. So I think we have been living in a mobile-first or mobile-only world in the rest of the world for a very long time. So I would sort of second that. I think the other thing, whether or not the ad-supported media model is also pretty much at the end of its life on the internet. So what I mean by that is that the scale of the platforms, whether it's a Facebook or a Google, and their ability to, at this massive scale, be extremely pinpointed on where the ad goes, has reached a point where I don't think, however large a media company can be, it can really compete on digital ads, right? So I think that's the second big thing that we are seeing, that it is the end of the digital ad-supported internet world. And I think we are facing the consequences of that in many fronts. Traditional media might still have some competitive advantage on that, but I think digital or mobile-first platforms will face that challenge.
All right, so the world truly is in our hands these days with our smartphones. And I'm also being joined by another guest now. We had some technical difficulties earlier on, but I am being joined by Dr. Imme Baumüller, Director of Data Technology and Business Intelligence at the Handelsblatt Media Group in Düsseldorf, Germany. Dr. Baumüller takes strategic decisions at Handelsblatt on products, sales measures, and business models with an emphasis on audience expectations. A warm welcome to you as well, Ms. Dr. Baumüller.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the technical issues.
That's no problem at all. We had just gotten started and we were discussing what the major changes are that we've all observed over the last decade or so in the shift from the analog world to the digital world. Would you like to share your thoughts with us?
Oh, yeah. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to hear everything my colleagues were already saying, but I think lots is the same no matter in which country. So it's all very fast. It's driven by technology. It's driven by the whole media industry is driven by big players that are not originally from the media. So we are competing against a much broader scope of competitors right now. That makes it quite challenging. And what we are seeing is that really you need to be a technology company rather than a traditional media company today. So the skills are changing a lot with regards to the journalists, for example. They have to be really, really at the edge of time, with concerns to technology, where content has to be very fast, very great usability. No matter if it's an app or a mobile embedded website, you have to have like the really great usability to engage users. So this is something that we see, and we try to improve our business in that sense.
Dr. Baumüller, could you briefly tell us what the business model is at Handelsblatt? Is it a paywall? Is it ads? Is it a bit of everything? We just would like to know.
Okay, so originally, of course, like many established media brands, we earned most of our money from the advertisement section, and that changed during the last 10, 15 years. And right now we have a subscription first model. So we are focusing on subscription. We have a paywall, and we are experimenting quite a lot right now. So it's supposed to be the hardest paywall in Germany, or the strictest paywall. But we try to, we really are trying to figure out which is the best solution. So of course we experiment with regards what device is the user using. So we would maybe have adaptations to the paywall. So this is something we're doing right now. We are testing a lot with regards to pricing, how to bundle the products. So which products you should be able to access if you have subscriptions, which you can add on, or maybe we are trying a lot with digital newsletters that are really like a dossier, like a compact information that is really deep into certain topics, and we try pricing with that. So we're trying a little bit of everything. We have podcasts, but we don't charge them. So maybe this will change to all of these things.
So in your case, diversifying is the method that you're using. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Patil, what about Scroll? How do you go about making money?
Yeah. So I think before I answer that, I see like two directions in which I come from a venture-backed company kind of background, right? So I'm speaking with that assumption in mind that we need to be attractive to how people in the venture world look at it. And there I see two directions. One is that you create a diversified model of a media company that had existed in the traditional world. Axios, in fact, being one of the great models here, that there is an internet version of it, but there's also the brand that is on, say, HBO with larger than life shows and all of that. Right? So that's like a path. And the second path, I think, is that you become a platform for payments, right? A creator marketplace. And sort of there are different words people are using for it. For the moment, I would use the word that I think is sort of apt, which is like there is this passion economy. You have tons of people who have great followership on social media. There are at least 50 million people with more than 1,000 followers on some form of social media. And this includes, of course, professionally produced news content, but they are not the only ones. There are tons of them. So our approach for the last almost 1.5, 2 years has been to transform ourselves into a platform. In fact, the news part of it is now run and completely owned by the journalists, and we are just a platform on which they are able to monetize, right? So to me, these are the two extreme directions. One is you become a platform for creators and for payments, and there are a few examples of this besides us. There is Substack, there is Scroll Stack, there is Patreon, and others. And I think, and again, this could be cognitive dissonance, but I think this is like as significant a change in direction of the internet as when the first digital ads started appearing in the mid-90s. We've now forget that when the first ads appeared, most people said that there'll be no advertising on internet. Who would advertise on internet? I think there is a similar thought here. Who would pay on the internet? But I think that the payments are, especially in India, we are able to charge on our platform as little as 15 cents in India and $1 in the US as the minimum payment. And the friction on payments is gone. You can, because of biometrics on the phone and a single. In the West, the infrastructure is less developed than, say, in India. But even in the West, it's starting to appear, and it's actually most developed in China. So the direction I see is the passion economy platforms for media to own and not repeat the mistakes of giving up those platforms as we did in the ad-supported world. And then, of course, I think there will be great brands that are digital first that'll come up, like Axios, who are able to do the swagger sort of media, like be a brand that can be in many platforms.
Mr. Johnston, do you agree that the dawn of the end of the ad era has begun because Axios is also funded by targeted ads? Or do you believe that there's going to be different models competing in the future?
Yeah, I'll agree, but extend and revise a little bit of what Mr. Patel says. I do agree 100% that if you're competing on scale for advertising, you're going to lose. Facebook and Google will just completely obliterate and dominate that market, similar to what Amazon will soon be doing in advertising. But what we're able to find in that if you're not competing on scale and you're instead looking at sort of the right kind of audience, you can build a very valuable ad-based business. Our business model from the start has always been predicated on sort of three pieces: advertising, events, and subscriptions. We haven't launched subscriptions yet. That remains sort of a plan in the future. So right now we're 100% focused on advertising and events. The majority of that is advertising. And these are ads that are sort of written in the same style as our newsletters, sort of taking the same lessons from our journalism, a native style brand of advertising that goes into our website, which goes into our newsletters, where we're able to find able to monetize sort of an incredibly valuable audience. Like what we will never be able to do is reach 500 million people the way Facebook or Google does. But what we are able to do is reach the million people who read Axios AM each morning and able to explain to advertisers that that's a very valuable audience. That's the president of the United States. That's some of the biggest CEOs in the United States. That's members of Congress. That's a very influential and powerful audience that you can't reach on Facebook and Google with those kinds of targeted ads. And so I think there's definitely a market online for that specific kind of ad. If you're giving advertisers the right valuable audience as opposed to chasing scale, which is what a lot of online sites did in recent years, and they have paid the price for that.
Thank you. And we already have a question. It's from Adrian in Austria, and it is for Dr. Baumüller. He wants to know why the Handelsblatt hasn't changed its model to entirely digital by now, as this is obviously the future. Dr. Baumüller, why aren't you entirely digital yet?
Okay, we are not entirely digital yet because we still sell our copies and we still make nice money with that. So it's not the biggest part of the money we earn, but it's still relevant for our business. And of course, we're thinking about maybe we are discussing having only one issue per week. But right now, this business model still works. And I think especially we being in the media, we all have this digital idea and we all realize that this is the future. But we tend to forget that there are still people out there who are quite traditional with regards to their media usage. So of course, younger people go to the internet and use all our digital applications. But there's still an audience that really has a great demand for the print issue. And if there's a demand and someone's willing to pay, we offer something.
Thank you for that. Now I'd like to turn to Mr. Johnston next, who does work for an exclusively digital news outlet, Axios. Mr. Johnston, now you have a long and illustrious career to look back on. You have worked for the Washington Post and later for Bloomberg for many years, covering some of the most dramatic moments in contemporary US-American politics. That's surely a dream job for many journalists. And now you are the editor-in-chief of a highly successful digital platform for the past 4 years, which certainly is also an exciting position, I'm sure. But what are some of the lessons you have learned from your career as a reporter that you are now actively applying to Axios as core quality standards, especially when it comes to making sure that you rake in all those clicks and thus make money from ad sales?
Right. I think the most important thing that I've learned over my career, which I think a lot of journalists are learning, is beginning to understand analytics and how readers react and what they're reading. When I started out at the Washington Post, we were just beginning the transition to digital, and we had journalists at that time had no data on what people were reading. We wrote a story, we put it in the paper, and that's all we really knew. It was only at Bloomberg that I really began to learn how readers were behaving and what readers were interested in. And we actually began to be able to look at the data, the analytics on how readers were engaging with stories and what they were looking at. And that's really sort of upended my entire view of how people were consuming information. We saw this a ton. Like I think every digital journalist probably has a story of when they first got access to the analytics and realized sort of like how completely it upended the way they viewed things, how readers weren't clicking through to the fifth screen of an 8-screen story, or weren't scrolling to the end, or weren't skipping past the headline. This has been validated by numerous studies. Like what Twitter is actually now doing, it's trying to force people to read stories. Like readers kept screaming at us that they didn't want to read all of this stuff. If you look at Chartbeat, the engagement metrics on that for across websites, the average reader engagement time when they click a link is 5, 10, 15 seconds. So clearly the reader isn't going to engage hugely with thousands and thousands and thousands of words. And so what we looked at, and the way I thought about it at Axios, and the founders of Axios who came from Politico actually also learned those sort of pieces of data, was instead of trying to convince readers to spend more time with something, why don't we hear what they're telling us and make it easier for them to spend less time, which is why at Axios, we really try and shorten our stories sort of immensely. We try and pack as much information we can into that first 150 words, which is what fits exactly on a smartphone screen, which is what most readers really engage with. And we give them the opportunity to go deeper, to read more if they want, but to try and solve the problem for them as quickly and efficiently as possible. If you look at our flagship newsletter, Axios AM, every day, it's about 1,000 to 1,500 words. And readers are just blown away. Like, that's all I have to read. I can spend 4 or 5 minutes reading something, and now I'm ready for the day, instead of sort of slogging through thousands and thousands and thousands of words to try to kind of find the piece of information I want. And so I think really what sort of the transition for me from going from a print newsroom to a hybrid print digital newsroom to one that's entirely digital focused, entirely mobile focused, has just been to realize that listen to the readers, listen to what the readers are telling you in the analytics about how much time they want to spend on a story and what they want to read, and go and meet them there instead of trying to trick them into doing something they don't want to do.
Okay, I guess that's a death knell on that favorite of subjects, the picture gallery. Thank you very much. And here's a reminder to our global audience that we are talking about revenue models in the digital age. Please, if you are watching us live on Facebook, send us your questions and we'll try to make sure that we present them to our panelists. Meanwhile, I'm proud to say that we have live viewers from around the world, from Pakistan, Kenya, Nigeria, Germany, Ghana, Austria, South Africa, and many other countries. Thank you all for making time for this session and tuning in. Now, it's perhaps somewhat ironic that we're talking about the shortcomings of the digital age today. After all, if it wasn't for this digital technology, we wouldn't be able to hold this event. But that doesn't mean that every last aspect of our lives has fully succumbed to digitization. After all, while they're certainly struggling, there still are some newspapers being printed out there. But how do they continue to make money? What measures are they resorting to in this volatile climate? And how come some are performing better than others? Our reporter Thomas Klein has an assessment on the current state of the print industry.
Print is dead. That's what the naysayers claim. Sales figures have been declining for years, affecting local journalism in particular. With ad revenue also tanking, publishers are struggling to stay afloat. This means that there is no way around new revenue models. Many news organizations have opted to go digital, effectively hiding some of their content behind paywalls. Audiences have to reach into their pockets to access these articles. But do they? That depends on the news organization. The New York Times is enjoying steady growth and success, having introduced paywalls early on. Even during COVID-19, digital subscription numbers continue to skyrocket. In the second quarter of this year, the New York Times made a turnover of $185 million with its digital content and related ad sales. Its analog print turnover for the same period reached only $175 million. So did the Boston Globe. The digital sales numbers of the newspaper are also growing. Meanwhile, the Financial Times has managed to move the majority of its following online. 75% of its audience subscribe to the daily newspaper digitally. But a paywall is not a guaranteed formula for success. Some publishers are reinvesting their profits into other businesses. Germany's large Axel Springer publishing house is spending its funds on startups, trying to gain a foothold in the digital realm using other means. And one local daily in Germany is trying to mix their business with pleasure. The Mindener Tageblatt newspaper is now distributing beer along with its newspaper deliveries. For many publishers, focusing on journalism alone is no longer a tenable and sustainable approach. But how far can news organizations go to keep their accounts in the black?
There's that question again. How far can news organizations go to keep their accounts in the black? And do desperate times indeed call for desperate measures? Or are these organizations simply being innovative? Dr. Baumüller from the Handelsblatt Media Group, having watched that video, are you planning on selling beer now?
Might be interesting, or I would prefer wine, actually. But no, right now, no, we're not yet. So what we are really doing, like Axios, maybe we have subscription business, we have advertising, and we have events or live journalism. And these are the areas where we are really good at and we have experience in. And we are trying to establish these areas as our revenue streams. But of course, media always is a fine line between education and media, for example. So if you go really into research, education, those kind of areas, this might be an option. But right now we are just mainly focusing on everything journalistic.
Thank you. And we have a question, and it's from Benson Mutahi Gitaiga in Nairobi, Kenya. And I suppose it's for all the panelists. There are conversations around the world about big tech and how it's cashing in on news organizations' content. What are your comments on regulating big tech on media they don't own but use within their products? Well, let's stay with Dr. Baumüller for a moment.
That's a tough question. So, okay, everything that has to do with data security and all these issues that are popping up right now in Europe and other countries too, the aim was to regulate the big technology player like Google, Facebook, and the likes. But what really happened is that we are struggling with it right now because we have these issues with people logging in, being insecure about their data security. So in this sense, data technology companies, the big player, they really made us struggle a lot, I think. On the other hand, they're quite... they're driving everything that's happening right now. So they're also maybe good for the business because they change the way we think, we act. But with regards to regulation, of course, it's a big issue. But yeah, we haven't found a great answer to that, I guess.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Patil, what do you think? What are your thoughts? How do we go about dealing with and regulating big tech on media they do not own but use within their products?
Yeah, so let me give you the short version of my answer and a slightly longer one. I think the shorter version of the answer is I think regulation it's not clear to me what problem does regulation solve. I think there are good reasons to think about regulating big tech on fake or bad information and all of that. We have seen that public debate. But a big tech regulation to fix the business model problems of media or news media, I don't see that as it's not a solution because in many ways, so that was the longer one. Now let me give you a little bit of my bias here, which is if we look at it, I'll give you 2 data points. Right? At the starting of the decade, or maybe 15, 20 years ago, the New York Times was read by 2.5, 3 million people in print. And now 100 million people read it, 5 million people or so roughly pay for it, and maybe 20, 25 million people have some app or some newsletter from them. So if I purely look at it from the public interest mission of that company, it has vastly scaled up and largely due to big tech. So I think there is that's one part of it. The second thing is I think we are at the sort of maybe at the beginning of the end of this pessimism around whether people will pay or not for trusted media. Instead of calling it news media for a moment, let me say that. Because everything in the last 8-10 years points to once you have innovations in format or form like Axios talked about, design for the mobile, once you have deep reportage of the kind that maybe the New York Times readers cares about, maybe other Financial Times readers care about something else, people are willing to pay. I would go out on a limb and say that the last 8-10 years have shown the limitations of business model. I would not pretend that we have an answer for that. but they have actually shown that the product is not obsolete. Digital media has not disrupted news media in the sense that, the appearance of cars disrupted the buggy wagon business. In fact, if anything, the New York Times example, all news, it's consumed far more. It has shown it is a more relevant product, the trusted media part. We have to be able to figure out a business model on top of it, and trying to whack the big tech for it is not going to be part of that answer. That's my sort of bias.
Thank you. And Mr. Johnston, what are your thoughts? Is big tech our ally or our enemy? And how do we adjust our business models around it?
I mean, I think we need to take the approach, certainly in the United States, that regulators aren't going to come and save us. And so the way I think about big tech is neither ally or enemy. Like, they have a job to do the same as I do. Like, Facebook's job is to make money and run Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg isn't supposed to care about media. Google's job isn't to support media. Their job is to run Google. And so the way I think media companies should think about it is that you should create a relationship with your reader that is not based upon the platforms. If you are relying on a Facebook algorithm to reach your readers, you are going to be in trouble, because one day Facebook will turn a knob on that algorithm and all your readers will disappear. We've seen that time and time again among digital media companies in the United States. And so I think our approach at Axios has instead have been, particularly through our newsletter model, is to create a relationship with the reader that cannot be upset by any of the platforms, have a direct relationship. Like, we ask you to subscribe to one of our newsletters, to raise your hand and say, here is my email address, please email me the news every single day. And so that is a relationship that doesn't matter if someone is retweeting me, or if I'm trending, or if I'm in a Facebook news module, or if I've optimized my search perfectly to reach all those kinds of audiences. I have an audience that is built in every single day. And I think that's the most important thing for media companies to do. What Mr. Patel said about the New York Times, I think, is a perfect example. If they've gotten hundreds of thousands, millions of people to download their app, to subscribe to their newsletters, to say they're going to pay for that kind of content, doesn't matter what Google or Facebook do. They have those readers as a pretty regular revenue stream. And I think for our perspective at Axios, through our newsletters in particular, there are millions of people now who we have a direct personal relationship with that no platform would be able to take away by tweaking an algorithm or anything. And I think that's what media companies really need to think about, is how do I create a relationship and a value proposition for a reader that is not dependent on some third-party platform to make it work.
All right. Thank you very much, and thank you all for those answers. We are discussing the difficult transition of media organizations into new revenue models in this digital age. And we've been highlighting the journey of print journalism in particular time and again within this context. Now, some print newspapers have already had to take the plunge and go digital only to save printing costs and maximize on the digital interaction they enjoy with their users. Now, in South Africa, there actually is an opposing trend, at least in one nationwide instance. The Daily Maverick publication, which for over a decade was digital only, has decided to put pen to paper in the middle of a global pandemic. And as a weekly publication, it can now be picked up as its print edition. But how can it afford this rather bold move? Well, the proverbial devil is in the detail.
Investigative critical journalism, that's the trademark of the Daily Maverick. It started in 2009 as a digital-only publication and has been at the forefront in exposing corruption and government failures in South Africa. In September, they decided to swim against the current and published a print publication for the first time.
Most media houses around the world have struggled with this process of moving from a print publication into the digital world and then having to digitally transform their operations. We've been digital only, right? So we don't have to digitally transform. We were born in the fire of digital, which meant, we could never be bloated. We always have to do more with less. And so we're taking that into the print space where the marginal cost for us to create a print product is so much less than what it costs a traditional legacy publisher to create a print product.
The weekly print edition is only available in one supermarket chain, and it is for free if you use their loyalty card. That way, the supermarket hopes to draw additional customers into their branches. Several publications in South Africa did not survive the pandemic. Big media houses have had to retrench staff amid falling advertisement revenue.
a lot of people are calling time of death on print. It's still a big market, a big advertising market in South Africa, and we'll compete for that. There was a 70% drop-off in print advertising in South Africa in April in a hard lockdown. That I think, given all of that and where we are now, that I think we're actually we should be pleasantly surprised at the level of commercial interest in the product.
The Daily Maverick's target is to break even and double the circulation to 50,000 papers within 6 months. Can other publishers keep up with such an expansion drive?
Well, there you have it. A unique approach to try to maximize on changing audiences. Now, here we had an analog model where a newspaper teamed up with a supermarket. And we also just spoke about big tech a moment ago, how newspapers, television channels, and all kinds of digital media have to team up with companies like Google, Facebook, and other giants around the world. Now, we have a question, and that question is, will digitization mean the end of the paper press in the future? Well, who'd like to go first? Dr. Baumüller, you work in a newspaper.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. But what I'm not too sure about is daily newspaper like ours. So right now, yes, in 10 years, I'm not too sure about it. But I think there's a great demand for really great printed issues that are on really like high quality paper, really great colors, all really like on high level luxury products. I think these kind of journalistic products will always or will still work as long as I will be in the workforce. That's like for 35 years, I think, roughly. So I think there's a demand out there for really great products. And what we see is that there's a demand for issues that are kind of one issue. You can just read like an e-paper or a dossier or something like that. So people demand something that helps them. So if I read this one e-paper, for example, I've read everything I need to know, and I'm not in this state where I always think, oh, I need to have new information, I need to read this and this and this to be up to date. So this is something we get reflected. If it's always printed, I'm not too sure about in the news media, but I think the demand for issues that you start reading and you're done with reading the news, this might be an issue for the future. And this is also something we might be considering as one option for our business model in the near future. We also already have the e-paper, but the question is right now, e-paper was something like an add-on, but we see a greater demand for that. And maybe you have a printed version of the most read articles, the month, the year, like best of, and that's really, really high quality. And I think there will be a demand for that in the future too.
What about you, Mr. Johnston? You know, they say that journalism is the first draft of history, but are some of those drafts, especially newspapers, going to belong in history books in the future? What are your thoughts?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a fascinating question. I don't think print is dead, but I think it's 100% thinking about how print should live. And I agree that the idea of a daily printed newspaper that's 30 pages long, that's printed out 12 hours ahead of time and put on a truck and thrown at your front door makes very little sense when that kind of information can be delivered very easily to my phone. But that means that there are definitely opportunities, I think, for smart journalists, smart designers to think about what are the moments that are better in print, right? If you think about book sales in the United States, they're at record highs because there is still a hunger to actually consume things in print. I think print is a very supreme mechanism of consuming information. If it's not sort of immediate in the moment information, I think it's very important for media organizations to think about exactly how I said earlier, sort of how do you meet the audience where they are. If it's a very quick individual sort of piece of breaking news information, realize they're going to read that on their phone. But if they're reading other types of things, then it's very possible that it would be more apt for print. And I think it's important for media organizations, for advertisers, for the business sides of media organizations to think about that and to sort of pick those places instead of just printing the same things on paper because that's the way they've been printing them for 150 years. That, I think, actually needs to evolve more.
Dr. Baumüller, I think I heard you chuckle there for a second. Was that in agreement or in disagreement?
That was an agreement, absolutely agreement.
So you're both moving forward on the same path. What about you, Mr. Patil? What are your thoughts? Is print dead?
It's not. I mean, I would agree with the two of them, and I would add though a wrinkle to it, which is I think when we say print is dead, there are two questions embedded in it, and we can unpack them. One is the print layout of a newspaper and a magazine for a moment. I would say has advantages that the mobile experience hasn't. Even though I'm a mobile first, and in a country where print costs are so big that actually having everything digital is a fantastic thing. But I would say that the complexity here is that the experience, just like tree books deliver an experience that has not fully been replicated or produced by digital product. I think there's a part of the newspaper and magazine experience that still has an opportunity to live in print, at least for a while, as a luxury product, I would almost say, but also maybe till display technology doesn't evolve. So what I mean by that, you can actually, when you open a newspaper, you can take a lot in. And one of the terrible things of the single, feed on Facebook or Twitter or all the product designs of most of our things is that, it doesn't really help you distinguish between what is opinion, what is news, what is analysis, what is editorial. And we have become this, and the newspaper model for 100 years had sort of some kind of a stable design there. So I think I would say there's a lot of opportunity to still take some of the things that made print good, but they will be digital for them to actually have any impact. Otherwise, it will recede into a luxury kind of sub-segments, like, people listening to LP records on their vacuum tube amplifiers 10 years from now.
All right. Mr. Patil, I'd like to stay with you for a second. There's another question I have that is unique perhaps to your publication. Now, in India, there's a long-standing tradition of government ads in media. And now all ethical questions about that aside, whether that's good or bad or wrong or right, how does that affect you? I mean, you've already expressed that you believe that ads are coming to an end as a form of making money in this business. But has this also driven you out of the market into looking for other solutions? Or is it something that you deliberately are fighting against, and that is why you're departing from this model?
Yeah, so actually they were never a significant part of the digital world. So I think it's a future question. Ads were, governments around the world move very slowly, and the requirements were mostly for traditional media. So they never became a big enough thing for digital. And I think our own idea of moving away from completely away from this model is driven by other things, such as like what I said before, right? It is hard to scale up a model other than probably in the richer Western worlds, which is in any shape or form dependent on ads. I think you can create a small set of news feeds that can do that, but it is hard. So to come back to your question, it was never a relevant really decision for us.
All right, thank you. Now, just very quickly, because we are coming to the end of the show, imagine someone is watching us who's a young journalist and who wants to take strategic decisions in terms of what they're going to study, how they're going to go about their careers, and how they can make sure they can live off journalism in the future. What would each of you say in a nutshell? Let me start with Mr. Johnston.
Wow, that is a tough one. I get asked this a lot. And I encourage young journalists to understand the business models in ways that I never did when I was growing up. When I started at the Washington Post, all I knew was that the newspaper was printed every day and it sold for a quarter. And that was it. And we even almost held the business side in contempt. We never wanted to think about that. We thought that was a dirty part. But I think it's far more important now for journalists to understand that, so they can understand that their company is going to thrive or survive in this kind of environment, and to think about sort of being entrepreneurial like that. I think this is a great time to be a journalist, with a number of new startups trying new innovative ways to do journalism. And so I think embracing that kind of change and disruption is the best thing you can do as a young journalist to have a fruitful and long career.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Baumüller, what are your thoughts on that?
I think every journalist should try to get as much technological background and skills as he or she can, and like also data skills, like learn to program in Python or something like that. I think great technology is the key to great journalism in the future. So I would always combine my journalistic education with that skills.
Thank you. And Mr. Patil, you have 30 seconds.
I would add to it that I would ask them to look at some of the traditional stuff as reporting on ground as a key part of building their careers. I see many people with actually the technical skills, but a disdain for the old model. So I would say show some respect for the old model that actually had many good things that we have lost.
Thank you very much. And I hope, yes, thank you. Many thanks to our wonderful panel today and for all those answers. Dr. Imme Baumüller from the Handelsblatt, Mr. Samir Patil from Scroll, and Mr. Nicholas Johnston from Axios. I hope we have all gathered some insights and learned something new to apply to our daily lives and especially to our careers. And also a very warm thanks to our global audience who have joined us today and have helped us with their questions and above all, their curiosity. Now, 2020 is nearing its end and we've only got one more DW Global Media Forum digital session left. Please join us again on December 14th when we will be looking at the power of constructive journalism. In the meantime, please stay safe, stay healthy, and remember to regularly check out our latest articles and watch our newest videos on our social media channels and on dw.com/GMF. I'm Sertan Sanderson, and thank you for joining me today.